Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. And one thing we have learned as a result of working from home due to the COVID-19 lockdown is the value of cloud computing and being able to operate virtually. We are also starting to dive deeper on how this technology can help build a more diverse workforce. Joining me is Talia Goldberg. She's a partner at Bessemer Venture Partners. We also have Harvey, head of sustainability at Nasdaq, to discuss the companies behind the technology, advantages and disadvantages of remote teams, and the impact it could have on ESG strategy. Talia and Evan, welcome to Trade Talks. It's great to have you with me.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us.
And Talia, I'm going to kick it off with you first. What are some of the trends in remote work that the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated?
Yeah, so thanks again for having me. I'm delighted to be here. First, there's a lot of changes that are happening. I think the most stark among our portfolio companies is the shift in how companies are thinking about their post-COVID team architectures as a result of suddenly being in this remote work environment where people are working from home. And I think it's led a lot of companies to rethink the team architecture and to consider long-term different models. The way that we think about it is that there are kind of three broad categories that companies fit into. Either one, sort of an on-premise, so to speak, model, where which is more traditional, where each employee or worker comes into a specific office location. The second being a more distributed model where a company will have a headquarters and then a lot of workers remote, or a network of regional hubs in a more hub and spoke model. And then lastly, a fully remote company where you are completely officeless. And so, Bessemer's portfolio company Zapier has actually been known for being a fully remote company scaling to over 300 plus people. And that used to be quite rare, but what we're seeing now is that many companies are starting to think about various benefits of remote work and how they can make the structure work for them long term.
And Evan, the COVID-19 crisis has focused attention on the S part of ESG in all kinds of ways. How are companies going to measure this?
Well, it's difficult. The S has always been the hardest part of ESG to measure, to quantify. How do you put a number on human rights and employee satisfaction and cultural cohesion? I think that in the past, we have had investors in particular looking into S as a necessary part of the ESG equation. But now with the work from home crisis and with all these questions coming up about what labor is and where the workforce actually sits and how we manage people in a dislocated environment, can we really put numbers on the S? Can we really use S as an investment driver in particular when we're evaluating the long-term sustainability of companies? And so I think it's been a maturational step over the last few months for the S part of ESG. Employee satisfaction, diversity, inclusion considerations, certainly. The responsibility of the company, the fiduciary and otherwise responsibility of the company for employee health and safety and medical fitness. So there's a lot of aspects of S that were at the fringes of the ESG investing movement that have now been put right into the middle of it.
Talia, what are some of the advantages of remote or distributed teams from an ESG perspective?
There are a number of advantages. So first, by nature of operating in a remote manner, you have access to the best talent across the globe. And as teams become more distributed and you can hire people no longer constrained or confined by geography or some certain number of miles away from an office, there's a lot of implications for tapping into a much more diverse workforce and implications for ethnic, geographic, socioeconomic diversity. And in fact, diversity really is a superpower of remote teams. Research has shown that there are 4 times as many female CEOs in remote companies as non-remote companies. And it really it levels the playing field for many that, may have different disabilities or people like new moms and dads who need to kind of balance work and life in a different way. And so that's been one of the huge benefits that we've seen for remote companies in terms of being able to tap into a much more diverse workforce.
Evan, the move to cloud has improved part of the environmental picture, but it also complicates that as well. How so?
It does. I totally agree with what Talia said. In fact, I think that there are aspects of the move to cloud and the dislocated workforce that are absolutely beneficial for environmental reasons and for social and inclusion reasons. But there are some complexities that we need to navigate too. If we move to the cloud, that doesn't mean that we're necessarily using less energy or that the emissions plan of the work infrastructure has changed all that much. We would think it improves because you no longer have a reliance on coal-fired plants and things like that. But the cloud is usually a giant building in the desert consuming a lot of energy. And sometimes they're very energy efficient, sometimes they're not. data centers traditionally have used a lot of water to cool the machines that are in there, which is a huge drain on that resource. So it's not an apples to apples comparison when you say if we move to the cloud, the environmental picture gets immediately better. There are complexities that we have to measure there too in order to make sure the transition is efficient and moving the net positive for specifically climate change in the right direction.
Talia, what are the strongest areas for investment in the world of remote work software, and what segments are you most interested in?
Yeah, so first, by nature of the shift to remote, we're seeing massive increase in accelerated adoption of cloud computing. But more specifically, we're seeing collaborative first everything. So companies that are rethinking kind of traditional software products to be collaborative first and to have much more collaboration really built in front and center to enable people to work together even when they're far apart. Second, we're seeing the growth in video in all aspects of the workforce. And we're really excited about companies that are actually powering the growth in video and maybe kind of helping with the fundamental infrastructure and APIs that are going to be enable other products to be built on top of and build video into their products. And lastly, one of the areas that's of particular interest for us, where we've already made one investment, is in the global payroll and HR and benefit space, where when you have a much more distributed team and are working with people across the globe, kind of managing and paying and supporting different worker types across different cities and countries can be a real challenge. And so we invested in a company, Papaya Global, which provides payroll and support for a global workforce. And we think that similarly, there's going to be a total rethinking and reimagination of what benefits look like for both a remote and distributed team when you're no longer the benefits are no longer the company cafeteria or having a coffee machine in the office down the hallway.
Can you share a few examples of Bessemer portfolio companies in this space who are embracing the shift to remote?
Sure. So Shopify, actually, which is a early Bessemer portfolio company and now a large public company, recently announced that they're rethinking their entire work strategy for a remote first environment and a remote structure. And so that's a really landmark example of that, just given the size and scale of that company. And we've seen kind of their thought leadership as well as others in the space start to trickle down and influence the thinking of other earlier stage companies as well.
Evan, I want to follow up on what Talia had said about reworking benefits, because COVID-19 will clearly require a reevaluation of key sustainability topics like workplace structure to benefits to employee resources. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's inevitable. I think the change was coming, whether we wanted this crisis to happen and accelerate things or not. We were already looking at ways to measure culture, especially productive culture, work culture, how the satisfaction of an employee contributes to the productivity bottom line of the company, how things like diversity, inclusion, and belonging and cultural attributes contribute to long-term portfolio performance and company return for investors and other people. So we were already moving down this road in terms of trying to get our heads around how we measure some of these more difficult and tricky aspects of company performance related to human capital. And I think that the crisis has only accelerated that point of view.
Do you think the sustainability disclosure process is going to evolve throughout this as well?
It has to. Yeah, it has to. We need new numbers. The traditional, tick box exercise of climate emissions, carbon emissions, and maybe a couple of board diversity stats isn't going to cut it anymore. We're hearing from investors, we're hearing from regulators, certainly in other parts of the world, and we're also hearing from companies, their willingness to be more on the record, especially with events of the last 4 to 6 weeks and social unrest. They want to be more on the record about their values. They want to be more upfront about what they believe and how they bring that belief to bear in their operations and for their employees. So absolutely, the data landscape is going to change. It's going to be more inclusive of these kinds of measurables.
Talia, Evan, thanks so much for joining us on Nasdaq Trade Talks. Excellent insight.
Thank you.
Always great, Jill. Thanks.
All right, and thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.